Hello and welcome to From Rewatch with Love, a James Bond cinematic rewatch podcast. I'm Graham Stark. Joining me is Matt Wiggins.
Hello.
And we're here to take a look back at 24 movies in the lead up to the 25th movie. I was going to say 25 years, and that's woefully inaccurate. This is only our second episode, as you might be able to tell. In fact, we're recording some number of these before the first one comes out. So I'm just going to assume that all of you had lovely things to say for the first one, and thank you for your kind words. This show and everything that we do on Loading Ready Run is brought to you by you and your kind support of our Patreon at patreon.com/loadingreadyrun. And we thank you hugely for allowing us to do this. Today's episode, the namesake of the podcast, because it was the best name for the podcast that we could come up with, From Russia with Love, the second James Bond film from 1963. Following the massive success of Dr. No, they were immediately greenlit for a sequel. In fact, they determined during the filming of Dr. No that From Russia with Love would be the second adaptation that they would do, the novel having appeared on the top 10 best loved books of JFK, which was a big surprise at the time because, you know, they're kind of pulpy.
Yeah.
From Russia with Love was known in the cultural zeitgeist, and they decided that that would be the second movie that they would adapt. United Artists increased their budget, doubled it to $2 million.
They did not let that budget go to waste.
No. In fact, they ran an over budget. and over schedule. The fact that this movie even made its release date is kind of a miracle, because there was a bunch of stuff that didn't get filmed or had to get cut, or stuff that was rebuilt totally in the editing bay. It's kind of wild. The budget adjusted for inflation is about $17.1 million of today. Mm-hmm. And it made $79 million in its day.
Yeah.
In 1963, which is about $678 million. So absolutely a massive blockbuster. This was an even bigger success than Dr. No.
Yeah, that's like, I don't know, you see a $600 million box office smash these days, and that's pretty big. It's not quite like Marvel movie territory, but it's nothing to turn your nose up at, right? That's a box office smash.
Yeah. Certainly not on a $17 million budget. Usually you get stuff that's like, oh, we just made this small indie horror movie for $12 million. And then it's surprise made $400 million. And then it's this wild success, and let's make 8 more of them. But typically you don't see blockbuster movies getting made for such a small amount as 17 million. Most of the same production crew is back. Director Terrence Young returns from Dr. No. Obviously, Saltzman and Broccoli are still producing all of these and would for as long as they remained upon this mortal coil. Screenplay by Richard Maibaum and Joanna Harwood. Editing by Peter Hunt, and I'll talk about him a little bit later. The big change from the production side of things was Ken Adams, who I talked about so much last episode, the production designer who designed all these amazing sets. He was not able to return for this. He actually did a little bit of work sort of later in the production, but he was not able to return to this movie because basically he'd been poached by Stanley Kubrick.
Oh.
Kubrick had seen Dr. No and just went, wow, these sets are amazing. Yo, I need you to come work on this movie, Dr. Strangelove, for me. And so the iconic War Room set in Dr. Strangelove, that's Ken Adam.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah, he did all the sets for Dr. Strangelove. So in Ken Adams' absence, his art director from Dr. No, Sid Kane, stepped up and honestly produced some also fairly amazing iconic sets. But Ken Adam would return for subsequent movies as well. And like I said, did some work later in this one as well. Generally speaking, this was, it wasn't even a year later. So this was sort of the gang's all back, and indeed with even more sort of tentpole James Bond tropes. You know, there's what could be classified as a spy gadget. You know, we see Q, we see the henchman with the unusual trait, and in fact, the spoilers, the thing where the big bad or the main plot is resolved, and then a yet undefeated henchman returns at the very end. That becomes a thing that happens in a lot of Bond movies.
Mm-hmm.
So that happens in this one as well. The opening title sequence, which we mentioned last time, was not really a thing in the first one, and also the song, even though the song isn't used in the opening title sequence. It's Well, I guess we'll talk about that when we get to it. But let's start things off with what happens in From Russia with Love.
All right. So, pre-titles. We enter at night in a hedge maze. Two people are seen skulking around the hedge maze. One, a blonde-haired assassin. The other, James Bond. And they play a game of cat and mouse as they hunt each other through this hedge maze. Each of them looking quite tense. They appear to be a good match for each other. Until suddenly Bond makes a wrong move, and the assassin sneaks out from behind him and uses a garrote built into his watch to strangle Bond to death.
Strong start to the movie.
Yeah, Bond struggles and falls, lies dead on the ground as the lights come up, and we reveal that this is ostensibly a test, and there is a whole array of people watching this going on. So they walk over and they congratulate the assassin for successfully completing this trial. The leader of this training team reaches down and pulls a mask off Bond, and it is revealed, in fact, that he is not James Bond, but he was another agent of this as yet unnamed sort of like training team. And that's basically it. Like we get the little like twist beginning. I forgot that this one actually happens as early in the franchise as it does, but we open on like Bond just getting murdered in the opening scene. And then the twist. It's like a very Mission Impossible twist too, where it's just like, oh, he was wearing a mask all along. It's not actually Bond.
They had to reshoot the mask reveal because the first time they did it, the actor underneath looked too much like Sean Connery. And so it was just sort of confusing. And then when they redid it, eventually they had the guy wearing it later have a mustache so that it was even more apparent. I love that through this whole scene, if you're watching it with the knowledge that it's a mask, his face barely moves. Like at the end when he's getting strangled, his like mouth opens and he goes like, ah. Right. But through the whole thing, his face kind of looks like it's made of rubber. Like I think they did something makeup wise to like take out some of the skin tone changes because it looks like a motionless rubber mask for a lot of this scene, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, what an amazing start to be like James Bond getting killed before we've even seen the opening titles. In the second movie, you're right. It totally feels like a thing you do much later in the franchise, but they were like, no, we got this great idea. We're doing it now.
Yeah, you've come to see James Bond in From Russia with Love, and then they murder him in the opening scene. Oh man, it's so good. Like this is as the opening scenes go, like as we dig further into this franchise, the cold open is going to get progressively more ridiculous and like giant stunt and or like big hook or something like that, right? And this one has the dramatic hook, but it's a really like small scale scene. They're just both skulking around in the hedge maze, and then one of them strangles the other. The reveal of like it being all in the dark, and then like all the giant floodlights come on, and there's like this huge stone mansion in the background. That's pretty cool. And there's like 200 people watching, all dead quiet until the lights come up. Like that's also pretty cool.
Yeah,
it's a good scene. It's a fun one. It's better than Dr. No's because Dr. No didn't have one.
Yeah, I guess we're strongly a contender for lead pre-title sequence with this one so far.
So far, yes.
Yeah.
So anyhow, the information we get from this is that there is a training camp. They are training agents to kill James Bond, basically.
Specifically, what are you trained in? Oh, James Bond murdering.
And we can sort of assume that this is Spectre, but I don't think they ever actually name it. I mean, we do find out later in the movie. Spoilers, I guess, Spectre's involved. But at the point when we have watched this and have not seen the rest of the movie, we just assume this is Spectre training James Bond murdering assassins.
Yeah, they don't say it in this sequence, but yeah, that's what they do.
And then from there, we roll into the opening credits.
This is something that Maurice Binder would do in all of his opening title sequences, is take vignettes and iconography from one or two scenes in the movie and sort of make that the entire visual style of the opening titles, which in this case is there is a scene with a belly dancer in the movie. And so the entire opening title sequence is the credits projected, like literally projected onto the various body parts of a belly dancer. Because it's just sort of like, oh, there's a belly dancer? Great. Okay, we got it. Got to plan for the opening titles now. But this is much more the quintessential James Bond opening title sequence than Dr. No was. If I'm honest, they get a little lazy as it goes on. Some of the opening title sequences, Mr. Binder is just sort of like, we'll do silhouettes, silhouette of a woman, silhouette of James Bond, and then some other silhouettes, and then water, and then silhouettes. And it's just sort of like, meh. This one's actually, to be fair, it's very well done.
Yeah, I think this one is actually really cool. I had forgot, like, this one's not one of the ones that really sticks in your mind over time. And the thing that surprised me is I know the song from Russia with Love, right? Like it's a vocal song, but they don't actually use the vocal version of it until the end of the film. And I had forgotten that they use just an upbeat, actually, like it's a completely rearranged version of that theme for the opening titles. They turn it into a medley with the James Bond theme where they sort of like switch from one to the other at the end.
It's much more like a classic overture.
Yeah, but the visuals in this one are awesome. I think the effect is really cool. You're right. It's the sort of like classic James Bond. It's like a lady dancing and, you know, taking an element from the film and expanding it out into a full title sequence. But the visual projection of all of the credits and then having the dancer like interact with the light creates a really cool effect. It is actually really quite visually, I don't know what the right word is. Like it feels quaint by a modern standard, but it's actually quite visually impressive. It creates quite a neat visual. So I like this one a lot. I think it's really cool.
Yeah. After the opening titles, we open with a shot of Venice, which I absolutely forgot until just this moment that actually the main bulk of the movie opens and ends with a shot of Venice because they're completely unrelated and there's no reason for both scenes to happen in Venice. But it is bookended by Venice, which I'd totally forgotten about. But there's an establishing shot of Venice. And by the way, this movie, the exotic location, in air quotes, because obviously it's not particularly exotic to the people who live there, but is Turkey. This takes place in Istanbul, so it was all shot on location or at Pinewood Film Studios. And in this movie, we actually get to see Turkey, like they do like establishing shots and stuff. I didn't realize until thinking about it later, after we'd recorded the episode, that in the first movie, they decided to shoot Dr. No because they only shot in Jamaica. They only had one location. But honestly, they do a bad job of showing off that they're in Jamaica. Like many of the scenes that are on location in Jamaica could have been shot any number of places, and there's no establishing shots. The widest shot we see of Jamaica is of Kingston Airport, and then that's it. The fact that it's taking place in Jamaica is like visually irrelevant to Dr. No.
Right.
And that's not the case in this one. There's lots of great shots of like mosques and amazing Turkish architecture and stuff. And it's like, okay, good. I'm glad that you're making use of the location that you're in. And they'd get even better at that. But yeah, we do open on this lovely wide shot of Venice because there was obviously some sort of B team at Venice. I mean, it was second unit filming in Venice because Connery and his co-stars were never in Venice.
Oh, really?
It's all rear projection. It's so weird.
Amazing. You know what? You're totally right. It makes perfect sense that it is. It's just funny because the final scene is like clearly set in Venice, but that's hilarious.
So we're at the International Chess Championships in this amazing set with a giant chessboard marble floor. There's a wide shot that involves like a matte painted ceiling because there's no actual ceiling on the set because of course it's a set and they need to put the lights somewhere. This like huge ostentatious room for a chess finals, and everyone's dead quiet as this like very intense chess game is going on. One fun thing about this scene, the moves that these players are taking, one of whom is relevant to the plot. His name is Kronstein. He's the Czechoslovakian player, and we'll later find out is a member of Spectre versus someone named McAdams, representing Canada, which is neat. The moves that they are doing this is the actual sequence of moves from a game between chess players Boris Spassky and David Bronstein at the USSR Championship in Leningrad from 1960.
Oh, wow.
They were like, we're going to do exactly those moves because it was like a big surprise. It was like a big surprise win. So they're trying to show that Kronstein is like a chess master, and he's like really smart. And that's what I love about this scene, is that there's this huge set, there's all this time put into this just to get over the idea that this guy is really smart and has planned everything meticulously, even though he is barely in the movie.
He's very good at planning things, you guys. We promise.
Yeah.
Look how meticulously he read this scene and was able to strategize around it.
Like this, it's not a short scene, and there's no music because, of course, it's chess. So it's all very silent. As he's sitting there, someone comes up to give him some water and like lingers weirdly, indicating that there's something maybe unusual. And Kronstein picks up his water and looks at the coaster, and it says, "You are needed immediately." And so Kronstein finishes the game, wins the game of chess, and then goes off to meet with Spectre number 1. The piece of paper has a Spectre watermark on it, which seems unnecessary. It seems very, very silly to have that on there. But anyway,
yeah, we got our doilies printed in bulk. Yeah. So, like, there are a ton of things I love about this scene. I think my favorite is like just the actor they've picked as Kronstein. When the waiter walks up and like places the glass down, like it's all in the context of this chess game, right? So the waiter is trying to be like, everybody has to be dead silent. There's big like signs says, silence. And the waiter walks up and very gently places the cup down on the coaster and like holds it for a moment so that there's no chance of it spilling. And Kronstein sitting there just gives him this death glare. Mm-hmm. The look on his face is just perfect. It's so good. He's just standing there like, why are you inconveniencing me with this water? And then he picks it up and sees the note and then uses the coaster to like dab the water off his lips and then tears it up in the most like obviously like attempting to be inconspicuous. But it's like it's conspicuous to the viewer, but inconspicuous, like it would just seem inconspicuous to anybody in the room, which I like. And then the turns of the game where he gets the message, it's like, you're needed immediately, and you're like, oh no, what's he gonna do? Is he gonna like get up and leave? And no, it's the very next move. He gets a surprise victory against his opponent that his opponent didn't see coming, and finishes the game in one move after getting the message, and then gets up and leaves. It's just like the whole arrangement of the events in this scene are like super compelling and do a great job of telling a little story around this dude. I like this scene a lot. It's a really great introduction to this guy. Mm-hmm. He heads off, as you mentioned, to meet Spectre number 1. Upon his arrival, we're actually introduced to a few people in this scene. We are introduced to Rosa Klebb, Spectre number 3. Mm-hmm. And then also in this scene appears the guy who was running the training camp, the big Russian dude that was running the assassin training camp appears in this scene. And I don't remember his name.
Oh, Walter Gotell. Sorry, the actor's name is Walter Gotell. Morzeny. Walter Gotell played a bunch of different characters. He actually reappears as Colonel Gogol in The Spy Who Loved Me.
Oh, okay. Yeah, the Russian like military commander or whatever.
Yeah, Colonel Gogol also appears in The Living Daylights, played by the same actor, 15 years from now.
Right. That explains why when I saw him, I was like, it took me a while as I was watching through this movie, because I had sort of like not remembered a lot of it. I'm like, isn't that guy the Russian? Why is he here? Which happens a bunch over the course of these movies, because they do reuse a lot of actors for different roles. One of the actors that plays Blofeld at one point plays like one of Bond's allies in You Only Live Twice. Like they do that a lot. So you have to sort of be a little bit blind to the actor that's playing any given role sometimes.
Amusingly, in this very scene, Blofeld is being played by two different people, because there's the body and the voice there, which are different people. And the body is played by Anthony Dawson, who played Professor Dent in Dr. No.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But he was a friend of Terrence Young, and he was like, hey, I just need some hands to like pet a cat. And so they
Yeah.
got Anthony Dawson in. And he plays Blofeld in the next movie as well, because you still don't see his face.
Right. Which is awesome. I'm like, one of my favorite things in this movie is when in the acting credits at the end of the film, Blofeld is just a question mark.
Yeah, which is so weird because he's not even credited as Anthony Dawson, and the voice actor is also totally uncredited. Man by the name of Eric Pullman, who would also voice Blofeld in the following movie.
Okay, so we've got all these people in one place. And like, I love this movie because as compared to the last movie, which is relatively simple, you know, it's just like straightforward. Bond goes, there's a supervillain, he's doing a bad thing. Bond figures out what's going on and goes and kills the bad guy at the end. This one has like a ton of stuff happening. There are multiple threads and like multiple people with their own agendas, all sort of working against one another or with one another at different points in time. Some of them not aware that, you know, that they're working for people that they don't realize they're working for, or don't realize they're being helped by somebody who's like hanging out in the wing. Like, they have really amped up the like Cold War espionage thriller aspect in this movie, and I love it. So in this room, we have Rosa Klebb, who has defected from SMERSH, the Soviet counterintelligence agency, but her defection from Russia has not been propagated to most of the Russian military. Basically, like, the entire Russian military force doesn't know she's defected. There's only a few at the very top that know she's defected.
It would be too embarrassing, which seems like a colossal security risk, but you do you, Russia.
Doesn't it? So she's now working for Spectre, but she's still able to show up in various like regional agencies and pose as her role as like a SMERSH chief or a colonel, because they won't know that she has defected. We have the guy who has been training agents to assassinate James Bond. And we have Kronstein, the guy who has come up with a great new plan that will achieve both the revenge that Spectre seeks for James Bond having killed their agent Dr. No, and also gain them a tactical advantage by capturing a Lecter decoding machine. So the idea is Klebb is going to select a girl from one of her like embassies or whatever, who is going to act as basically sort of like a honeypot for James Bond. The backstory being that she has seen the intelligence files, like she works for the Russian government. She's seen the intelligence files relating to James Bond, and because of his like file photo, fallen in love with him and has decided that she wants to defect to the UK, and the benefit that she will provide the UK for this defection is she will provide them a Lecter decoding machine, which will allow them to decode like Russian encrypted transmissions. That's the plot that they have enacted. They expect that given this story that MI6 will use James Bond. They will send Bond to pick up the girl, because at worst they believe MI6 will immediately recognize it as a trap, but will see the trap as a challenge and send their best agent to do it.
Because apparently he's determined, this is Kronstein's read, that's just how the British operate, that they're so thick-headed that they're just like, a trap, you say, let's crack it. And it's like, yep, you're not wrong.
That's their sort of like worst case scenario. Their best case scenario is that Bond is just so full of himself that like believes the story to letter one and just goes along with it. So that's the gist of that. But they are also going to dispatch an assassin to intercept the Lecter and kill James Bond. So the agent that they dispatch from what it ends up being is the agent that they dispatch from the Russian embassy in Turkey. She won't know what's actually going on. She will, as far as she knows, she's doing it for Russia. And there will, in fact, be a Spectre assassin sent out to essentially kill them both and take the Lecter, bringing the Lecter decoder to Spectre and giving them the ability to decode Russian transmissions, because they don't presently have that. So that's the plot as it is laid out in this scene.
Amusingly, in the book, the decoder device is called the Spectre, which they obviously changed because that would be very confusing. And in the book, it's just Smersh. The Spectre angle is completely not part of the book. They changed it because they didn't want to make Russia the bad guys. They were like hoping that maybe the Cold War would end someday, and they were like, okay, let's, Russia's part of this, but let's not actually make them the bad guys. Let's make Spectre the actual bad guys. And so this whole third tier thing of Spectre being in the shadows and controlling this like UK Russia conflict is part of the movie. And in fact, a lot of it came up like during production. And for those who are unaware, production is like during filming. There's pre-production, which is the planning, and typically when you finish the script, but that wasn't the case here. Production, which is when you're actually making the movie, which is when the script was finished, and then post-production, which is the editing and stuff, which production and post-production overlapped a lot because this was a long filming. And watching the bonus features on the Blu-ray, a lot of this came together like late. Like the notion of having the assassin, Red Grant, the notion of like having him be the one to kill the guy in the mosque later and to have him trail Bond around, that was a very late addition. And when they made that decision, they were like, oh, this actually clarifies the whole movie. This makes this way better. And it's like, that was not originally in there. Oh my gosh. What was this?
Wow.
What was this going to be? So this scene, I mean, you might notice that this scene is very weirdly edited.
Yeah.
There are shots. So the first shot of it with Kleb going over to look at the fish tank is actually a shot from later in the scene played in reverse. I cannot believe that this made it into the movie. I mean, look, I've done editing for ages, and like on the one hand, major props to Peter Hunt for being able to save this scene with what they had. But on the other hand, holy crap, dude. Like the like jarring editing, cutting back and forth between the fighting fish while Spectre #1 is talking about fighting fish, really, really jarring. There are shots of Frau Kleb where she is rear projected onto a different shot of Frau Kleb, where she is literally obscuring herself so that they could record new dialogue. Because they had to completely rewrite this scene like very late, like after principal photography was over. And they're like, okay, well, we can't get Constantine's actor back. There's no way to do that convincingly, but we can get some of Frau Kleb's lines and we can dub over everything Blofeld is saying because it's a different actor. So we can completely restructure this and actually sort of save because this is the scene that's supposed to set up the movie. Because in planning originally, Kleb goes to pick the assassin and then goes and has this scene with Tatiana and then has this scene. And we have no context for what's happening in those scenes because this scene hasn't happened yet. And it's supposed to be like, oh, I get it. But this movie, as the movie finally aired, it's much more straightforward of like, we, the audience, know from the beginning that Spectre is doing all of this. And it actually makes the movie much better.
The fighting fish is a great little thing. Like that's a great little hook they use to sort of lay out the underpinnings of this plan too. It's like, they're brave but stupid, except for this one, which sits back and lets these two fight until they tire each other out and then comes in for the kill. And that one is us, Spectre. Yeah. Like that's a good little bit. So we learn of this plan. The whole plan is laid out. Kronstein gives his seal of approval, saying this plan is foolproof. I have planned for every eventuality. Nothing could possibly go wrong. They're like, all right, all of you go do your things. And everyone is dispatched to their various places to go do their things. I think we then cut from there to Kleb. She goes to the training ground and the training master takes her to like, we've got this guy. He is... I believe they call him a psychotic paranoiac or something to the effect.
You do the murder real good.
Yeah, he kills real well. There's a great little scene where she this is basically like an assassin spa that she flies into. Like she lands a helicopter in the middle of this like assassin spa, and the like assassin is lying there sunbathing, and like a woman comes over and like strips down to her skivvies and then like puts oil in her hands and starts giving him a back massage. Kleb walks in and sort of interrupts them in the middle of this back massage and is like, come over here. And he comes over and poses like the sort of optimal human specimen he is. And She sort of like walks around him, then while standing behind him, pulls out a pair of brass knuckles, puts them on, and just winds up and just gives him a right hook straight to the abdomen, which he doesn't flinch at all. And she's like, yes, good, he will do. I'll take him, and leaves.
Yep. It's wild. It's absolutely silly.
So now we go to Istanbul, and Kleb sort of getting all the pieces ready, now posing as Colonel of Smersh, calls Tatiana in to meet with her, and she lays out the whole story. It's like, all right, here's the deal. You are going to be posing as someone who is in love with James Bond. You're going to lure him in. You're not going to be a cipher clerk anymore. You're going to be an agent in the field. Can you seduce this man? And she's like, well, I don't know. It'll depend on how nice he is to me and how he looks. And she like gives her a photo of him and is like, if he looks like this, if he's kind, probably I could. Kleb sort of like puts the gears to her and is like, all right, can you do this or not? And she's like, well, what if I refuse? And he's like, then you will not leave this room alive. And she's like, okay, I can do it. Sure. Point me in his direction. Let's go.
Seems like Tatiana thought that she was talking hypothetically, where it's like, hey, could you do this? She's like, well, I mean, I could probably, and then Kleb being like, no. Your assignment is you are going to seduce this guy. This isn't a discussion. And it's like, oh, okay, right.
Yeah, so she agrees, and this is how the whole plan is set in motion. So then we do cut to Bond, and Bond is on like sort of in the British countryside, I guess, hanging out in a boat with none other than Sylvia Trench, his date from the last movie, or from the beginning of the last movie before he ran off to Jamaica. They're having a fine afternoon. They're out for a picnic. They're hanging out in a boat on the shore of a river, making out. Sylvia seems quite pleased that he's there, looking forward to quote unquote lunch. And then all of a sudden a buzzer starts going off in Bond's jacket. So he grabs his jacket, has this frankly hilariously large buzzer, which is indicating that he needs to call into work. So he gets up out of the boat despite her protestations and is like, nope, I need to go make a phone call. He walks over to his car where there's like a full-blown corded phone in his dashboard.
I assume the car phone was like wild technology for 1963.
Yeah. It's like, oh, he's got a pager and a car phone in 1963. He's clearly a well-funded, highly, like, the peak of technology working on the side of the British government here. But it feels a little quaint by today's standards. Anyhow, so he calls in and gets a hold of Moneypenny, and Moneypenny tells him that that M is demanding his presence immediately. She asks what he's doing. He says, oh, I'm brushing up on an old case. Meanwhile, Sylvia has walked up behind him and starts sort of trying to entice him back to the picnic. So there's a little bit of banter between Bond and Moneypenny as she's like, oh, it sounds like your old case is quite interesting, James. And James manages to sort of dismiss Moneypenny and hangs up the phone, and Sylvia then is like, oh, an old case now, am I? But like, this is just a cute little scene. I like this little scene quite a lot.
I like that Moneypenny basically tells James, like, you can probably finish up whatever you're doing before you come in. when she's like, because he says, all right, I'll be there in an hour, and then Moneypenny says, your old case sounds kind of interesting, and then Bond's like, all right, an hour and a half then. It's wingman Moneypenny in there with the help. By the way, Sylvia Trench was supposed to be like an ongoing, like, regular girlfriend of James Bond.
Right.
She actually only appears in the first two movies, but like the idea was that she would be the long suffering regular girlfriend who Bond is always being pulled away from to go on these missions.
Right.
I guess they eventually after this movie, they were like, that's maybe silly.
It's silly, but it's charming. I like it a lot. They found a really good actress for her too. Like, I just wish she had been around more. I like I haven't seen you in 6 months, and the last time we were supposed to have a date, you ended up getting pulled off to Jamaica. And that sort of like three-way interaction of like Bond and Moneypenny and Sylvia all sort of like talking around each other it's just fun. Like, it's just a fun human aspect of this film that I like a lot. Yeah, it's quite cute. So anyhow, he finishes lunch, quote unquote, and then heads on into MI6. And he is informed in this meeting that they have received a request from Tatiana to defect to the West in exchange for providing a lector. M reveals that he intends to take them up on this because MI6 wants a lector machine. Bond comments on the fact that the CIA has been looking for a lector machine for years, and they basically all sort of agree. It's like, well, this is obviously a trap. Yeah, of course it is, but we can't not do it. There's a lector machine on the offer here. We have to at least follow through. So M basically tells Bond, like, Bond, you're going to go and you're going to woo this lady. You are going to get the lector and you are going to bring her and the lector back to England. Got it? And Bond is like, oh, I'll do my best. Really, really like putting out there, because he's now seen a picture at this point, that he's really put out by this request to woo Tatiana. He does not actually think it's going to be a very difficult mission from the looks of things, and his eagerness to take the mission on. But before he departs, we are finally introduced to Desmond Llewellyn as Q, who shows up with what is basically our first actual Bond gadget. He has an attaché case that contains several defensive things. It's got 2 little pillars full of ammunition, like 20 rounds of ammunition in the case. There's a flat throwing knife that can pop out. It has a little like collapsible sniper rifle inside it. It has 50 gold sovereigns. I have no concept from today's like perspective of how much money 50 gold sovereigns is, but it comes up later. I guess it's a lot.
I looked it up and it's like apparently a sovereign is roughly akin to a pound sterling, but like they weren't using decimal currency at this time. It's like maybe $500 for 50 sovereigns, but we must be getting this wrong, because later in the movie when it comes up, it's like, holy crap, that's a huge amount of money. And so yeah, I don't know exactly what a sovereign is supposed to be worth.
Some amount of money. He also has he's got a little like container of talcum powder, and the talcum powder is actually a tear gas cartridge that's held in the case by magnets, and if you open the case the normal way, it explodes the tear gas, but if you turn the latches sideways and open them that way, the tear gas is not like deactivated and doesn't blow up.
Awesome.
So we got all that. That's like, as we get further into Bond movies, I'm sure I hope most people listening to this are at least casually familiar with the idea of Chekhov's gun, where you set something up and then it pays off at some later point in the film. You don't show something that's cool and then not use it.
It is very rare that Bond will get a gadget and not use it. I'm sure it happens like maybe once or twice, but it's very rare that they go through this whole rigmarole of Q coming in, showing Bond a cool thing, and then it not coming up at some point.
So we're pretty much going to have to run down the gadgets in any given film because they get used. They're all cool. But anyhow, basically everything that was on that list there is going to come up at some point later in the film. So he heads off to Turkey, which is where he's been told that he is meeting with Tatiana, and he has been told that she will make arrangements to meet him, that he is not to he's not to try and set up the meeting. The meeting will just happen.
According to cursory Googling, just based on the pure bullion weight of a gold sovereign, because it is just literally a gold coin, today they're worth about $400 each.
Oh, okay.
Again, I don't know what they would have been worth. That'd be so heavy. 50 gold sovereigns? That'd be such a heavy briefcase. Oh my gosh. Anyway.
But that's $2,000? Is that right?
I guess
$400. Yeah, $2,000.
It's a lot of money.
400 times 50. That's $20,000.
Okay, sure. All right. Also in that scene, we see Desmond Llewellyn, who I mentioned last movie was not in Dr. No, but Desmond Llewellyn now appearing here as Q, Major Boothroyd, head of Q branch, the quartermaster, however, lovingly referred to as Q, and he would appear in 17 James Bond films. The longest running actor of any of them.
So we arrive in Turkey. Upon arriving in Turkey, we meet up with Ali Kerim Bey, who will be sort of like Bond's touch point in Turkey. I don't remember what his specific role was. Oh, he's the head. He's the head of MI6's branch in Turkey.
Yeah, he's the head of Station T.
That's right. So Bond meets up with him, and Karim Bey just sort of like guides Bond around and helps him get the lay of the land.
Great moment where Bond's being picked up at the airport, and which we saw go very badly in the last movie. And so they have this, and this is actually really relevant for later, a code phrase, which is Bond has his cigarettes, and he says, hey, can I get a match? Is a lighter okay?
Can I get a match? Oh, I only have a lighter. Even better, except when they go wrong, is the like 4-part key phrase.
Yeah, which comes up later in the movie, but he exchanges that with the chauffeur, who ends up being one of Karim Bey's sons. As he points out, all the people who work for him are his sons, because blood is the only thing you can trust in this part of the world. He has an extensive family. He has apparently had many, many children.
Yeah, everybody who's working for him is his son. It's great.
I also want to talk briefly about Karim Bey, because everyone likes this character. He's so nice and affable. He's played by Pedro Armendariz, who was a Mexican actor, one of the sort of best known Mexican Latino actors of his day. Was in a lot of movies in the 40s and 50s. Kind of weird that a Mexican is playing someone from Turkey. Here we are. And this sadly would be his last movie, because he and many other people were in the John Wayne movie, The Conqueror. Now, if you're familiar with the story of The Conqueror, it's absolutely effed up. They filmed, this is the movie where John Wayne plays Genghis Khan.
Okay.
Are you familiar with this?
I am not familiar with this, so
Oh,
I'm in for a story here.
this is John Wayne. This is the like, well, hey there, Pilgrim. Like the classic Western movie John Wayne. He really wanted to play this role. This was like the height of his star power. And people were like, wow, that was badly miscast, because he's playing Genghis Khan. So he's got like slightly skin darkening makeup and a Fu Manchu mustache. And that's the only change. He's still just like, well, I'm the barbarian king, Genghis Khan. Like it's so bad. It's comically bad. But the real tragedy of this movie is that they filmed it in St. George, Utah, which was about 150 miles downwind from the Nevada testing site. The Nevada testing site is where the US government tested atomic weapons in Nevada. So they filmed for weeks at this testing site. And then when they had to do pickups, the production crew trucked dirt from this highly irradiated area back to Hollywood so that the soundstage visuals would match where they'd been filming on location. The government was like, oh, it's perfectly safe. And it absolutely was not.
Right.
Almost half of the cast and crew on The Conqueror died from cancer that they caught from the radiation of just filming this movie downwind of the Nevada testing site. It's
right.
Like including John Wayne, who people assume was accelerated by his heavy smoking. But among them was Pedro Armendariz, who found that he had terminal cancer during the filming of this movie, and was like absolutely like fought tooth and nail to finish this movie so that his family would get the money, basically.
Right.
He's like, no, I have to finish this movie, like going to the producers and the director being like, I'm going to finish this movie. So they sort of rearranged the production schedule so that all of his scenes were shot first, like to the point of like some scenes were shot completely out of order. And it's like scenes later in the movie, we've got just the shots with Karim Bey in it filmed so that we can let him go. And he was getting weaker and weaker as the production was going on. But he finished the movie, and it's super sad, actually. 4 months before the movie was actually released, he took his own life in a UCLA hospital rather than let cancer run its course. With a gun, he snuck into the hospital. I mean, God, this guy seems like is, the just, you should, if you have an opportunity, you should probably read like his, like the truncated biography. It seems like a very Dos Equis most interesting man in the world scenario for this guy. But yeah, just an amazing story. And he's best known to most audiences outside of Latin America for this role as just like, he's just great. Everyone loves this character.
He's great.
He's so good.
Yeah,
So,
he's one of the highlights of this film for sure.
Absolutely.
All right, so we've met Kerim Bey, although just before we meet Kerim Bey, because this will also come up later, as he is being driven to MI6's branch in in Istanbul. He's picked up by Kerim Bey's son. They drive along. There's a car following them. Bond comments on the fact that they're being followed. That happened in the last movie as well. He gets picked up from the airport and is immediately followed. And there was a whole thing about that in that movie where they had to evade the chase and his driver was a bad guy and like all that sort of thing. This one, he comments is like, I guess it's customary to be followed, in this neck of the woods. And the driver is like, oh yeah, it's Citroen 17 today. They follow us. We follow them. It's, do we just keep tabs on each other? And then he just like turns a corner and parks, and the car sort of like parks down the street, and guy gets out and sort of like peers at them. And it's apparently the Bulgarians working for the Russians are the ones that are following them. Bond basically just has a tail from these Bulgarian agents for half the movie. Essentially, they don't do a whole lot. They just sort of like keep tabs on him and watch him. They are involved in one scene that'll come up, but for now we just need to know they're there and that it's known that they're there. So Bond arrives with Kerim Bey and they hang out. He gives him the lay of the land. Kerim takes him through like this underground waterway built like 1600 years ago that connects the MI6 detachment and the Russian embassy, and has like a British submarine periscope built into it, which is amazing.
It's so good. There's a little scene prior to this where Red Grant with Frau Klebb kill one of the people who was tailing them to try and escalate tensions between the Turkish people working for the British and the Bulgarian people working for the Russians, to the point that then someone tries to kill Kerim Bey with a limpet mine on the outside of his wall by his desk.
Oh, right. That was before this. Yeah.
Yeah. And then so Bond shows up and he ends up not getting him because Kerim Bey he's off trying to make another son. So he's in a different part of the room. Then Bond shows up and they're all very like, oh, well, yeah, no, tried to kill me, but we'll clean this up. Anyway, yeah, come with me. And then they head down into this boat, and then they're peering through the thing looking into the embassy.
Right. But that's part of where the tale comes up, because Red Grant steals the car and uses it to tail Bond around Turkey at one point, which Bond doesn't think is remarkable because he's now been told that being followed by this car is normal. Meanwhile, the Bulgarian agent is like stranded on the side of the road, and the guy that was driving the car ends up murdered in the back seat. And Red Grant just parks it in front of the Russian embassy with the dead guy inside and walks off and gets into another car and leaves. And that's what leads to the limpet mine being planted, because they think that MI6 did it, and various machinations are machinating all around. But everybody's so nonchalant about everything, including Kerim Bey, who, you're right, is like, oh yeah, they just tried to kill me. Whatever. We'll clean this up. It'll be fine. They didn't get me. And then they go to the Russian embassy. They use this periscope. The story being that they had to evict the Russian embassy for some sort of survey, I think, of like a historical survey of the building. And while this was done, he had the periscope installed into their conference room. And by the time they were let back in, it was all done. So they use the periscope to figure out who's in the room, and they find that the Russians have enlisted the help of one of their assassins, Krylenko. He was the one that planted the limpet mine. And so they decide that they need to kill Krylenko before he can flee the city, just to sort of like get revenge on him for trying to blow up Kerim Bey. So they pile back into the boat, head back to MI6 station, and Kerim tells Bond that he shouldn't stay in his hotel, but that he's got some friends he can stay with. He's like, come with me. We're going to stay with my friends for the night. They head off to
a Romani camp.
Yes.
By like some ruined castle. It's so odd. And he's like, oh yeah, we use these folks like the Russians use the Bulgars. And it's like, oh yeah, cool.
Yeah.
So is fodder.
Yeah.
Great. All right, neat.
Yeah, this is not an unproblematic scene, this one.
No,
because he gets there
weird.
and he's like, all right, well, it turns out we've come on a bad day because two of the women in the camp are in love with the same man and they have to solve it the traditional way. So it's like, come with me, sit down, they'll find us a place, say and do nothing to interfere. And, you know, they will welcome us as family. And it's just a woman-on-woman wrestling match in the middle of the encampment.
Yeah, I haven't been able to determine how interpersonal conflicts were solved in mid-century Romani communities, but I'm betting it wasn't this.
Probably not. It ends up not mattering because as the fight is happening, the Russians who have tracked Karam down and have been following him, like, basically raid the camp, and there's a huge gunfight, and all the Romani people are involved in this gunfight, and Bond is like going around just like heaving people into ponds and like letting wagons loose to run people over, and the whole camp is on fire. Karam gets shot in the arm. The like important thing that happens in this whole action scene is that a couple of times Russian agents get the drop on Bond and mysteriously die. So, like, one guy drops in behind Bond with a knife and a gunshot rings out. The man drops. And Bond, realizing that, like, he didn't even know that dude was there and was in trouble, is like, oh, who just saved me? But anyhow, the Russians are repelled. And they sort of like collect the wounded. And we are tipped to the fact that it was Agent Grant, the assassin trained to kill James Bond, that was basically functioning as a guardian angel for him and keeping him alive through all this. So the battle all ends. The leader of the Romani camp basically invites James Bond to settle the dispute between the two women that were arguing over the son.
Well, because James had saved his life. Yeah, Karen Bay was like, he says, thank you for saving his life. You are now his son. And James is like, okay, cool. Can you make those two stop fighting? And he's like, you can settle this. And it's like, what the hell?
Not only it gets to be one step more what the hell.
Oh, it really
because
does.
He says, oh yeah, you can settle this, and then both of the women end up falling for Bond and essentially just sort of like serving him all night until he leaves the following morning, and it's never spoken of again.
Yep. It's the next night. That's the thing, is like they spend the night and they wake up the next day and they hang out in the camp like all day, and then the next scene is at night again. It's very, very strange.
Anyhow, Karam asks Bond for help killing Krylenko before Krylenko can flee the city. They go to Krylenko's safe house. Bond uses his little sniper rifle, and basically we learn that in this safe house there's a secret escape hatch in the side of the building into this painted mural. So they send some dudes dressed as, like, some of Karam's sons dressed as police officers to go knock on the door. This leads Krylenko to flee his safe house through the escape hatch, and Karam is like, no, for my honor, I need to kill him. Can I use your rifle? And Bond is like, okay, just don't miss. And so Karam takes the kill shot to kill Krylenko and thanks Bond for his help. With this sort of plot thread resolved, Bond is able to head back to his hotel, knowing that there's not an assassin chasing after him anymore. So he gets back to his hotel after all the events of the past 24 hours and goes to get into the shower, basically, when he hears some thumping in the bedroom of his suite. So he grabs his gun and he goes and peers through the door, and lo and behold, there's a naked lady running around in his room, and she jumps into the bed, and he walks into the room and basically meets up with Tatiana at this point, who is like, hey, come to bed. And Bond starts sort of asking her about the Lecter and what have you, and she's like, no, come to bed, we can talk about that in the morning. And then they hook up because, you know, they do that.
And then the camera pulls back to reveal that the giant mirror placed at a weird angle above the bed is in fact one-way glass, and the entire thing is being filmed by Frau Klebb.
It sure is.
Which will indeed come up later. I guess actually now would be a good time to talk a little bit about Bond's co-star here, Tatiana Romanova, played by Daniela Bianchi, who was first runner-up in the 1960 Miss Universe contest, where she was also voted by the press Miss Photogenic, which is, it's a nice way of saying she's really, really attractive.
Yeah.
She also, because she is Italian and, has probably a passable English, it was dubbed completely by Barbara Jefford, who has an OBE. She has theatrical performances with the Royal Shakespeare Company. So, like I said last episode, a bunch of the first several movies were sort of like, let's just find someone totally unknown to English-speaking audiences who's really hot and don't care if she can't speak English that well. We'll just dub her over. And it's like, all right, guys.
To be fair, they did a really good job with the dubbing. It's like, it's not apparent.
No, you would never know that Sylvia Trench is also dubbed over.
Really?
Yeah. Don't know why. Eunice Grayson can speak English, but they dubbed her over anyway.
I guess, like, in this movie, I guess it makes sense because they're outdoors and maybe like ADRing it was just easier.
It's
Is
amazing.
She dubbed over by a different actress?
Yeah, she's dubbed over by someone else. She's dubbed over by Nikki van der Zyl.
For what possible reason?
I don't know, man. They're just like,
they couldn't get her to the recording booth? Who knows?
The scene in the periscope, right, where they're looking through the periscope, they were like, they thought that Daniela Bianchi's like legs were not as ideal as perhaps they could be. And so in that scene, when Tatiana's walking around in that scene, when they're looking up through the periscope, that's not Daniela Bianchi. That's a leg double. It's so profoundly weird. Daniela Bianchi, by the way, would go on to have a reasonably successful movie career after this. One of the movies that she did, I know we're already running way long on this episode, but I have to talk about this briefly. There was a movie that was made in 1967 to capitalize on James Bond mania, and it was released as OK Connery or Operation Kid Brother or Operation 007. And
I've heard of this.
Yeah, it is absolutely ludicrous. It's not worth covering on this podcast, but I absolutely recommend that everyone go out and watch the Mystery Science Theater episode where they watch this movie. The main bad guy is Adolfo Celi, who plays the bad guy in Thunderball.
Okay.
He works for an agency that's like kind of Spectre-ish, the head of whom is played by Anthony Dawson, who in this movie plays Blofeld. The main love interest co-star is played by Daniela Bianchi.
Okay.
Bernard Lee is in it, basically playing M. Lois Maxwell is in it, basically playing Moneypenny. And the lead, the super spy, who also in this movie is a champion archer and a plastic surgeon and a hypnotist who can like force people to do things through the power of amazing hypnosis, is played, I'm not kidding you, by Sean Connery's younger brother, Neil Connery. It's absolutely bizarre. The music is by Ennio Morricone. Like, this is a real movie that exists, and it's not a parody. Like, Austin Powers is a parody of James Bond. This is not a parody. It's just trying to be another spy movie with all the people from James Bond and Neil Connery, who, not unattractive, they are from the same genetic makeup, has about the charisma of a block of cheese.
Oh, no.
It's absolutely wild that this movie exists. So that's why I'm like, we're not going to do it on this show, but you should definitely watch the Mystery Science Theater episode on it, because it's, I mean, for one thing, everyone's dubbed over in that movie.
Yeah.
And it's much more obvious.
Oh, wow.
I'm sorry.
We are at Bond has just slept with Tatiana for the first time, and they are about to enact their plan. That's where we are. So picking up from that thread, so they spend the night together. They are filmed by Spectre, and when they part ways the next day, Bond basically tells Tatiana that she needs to get plans for the Russian embassy so that they can figure out a way to steal the Lecter. And so they form a plan to meet at, I think it's a mosque, where they can sort of like appear as tourists, like a big historical location. They're not going to meet directly. She's gonna steal the plans, like a map, or create a map of the embassy and drop it there, and Bond's going to pick it up so they can formulate his plan. So they meet at this location, and they are being tailed by the one Bulgarian who's still alive, and so she gets spotted there. Right, the Bulgarian spots her, and she leaves like a little like makeup kit next to a pillar, which the Bulgarian gets to first. As he's bending over to pick it up, Agent Grant comes out of nowhere again and murders him, and Bond then sort of stumbles across the body of this Bulgarian agent and the drop of the map. So he picks it up and he makes his escape and heads back to MI6, where he and Karim look over these plans and sort of like compare them to some blueprints that Karim was able to locate of the facility, to sort of make a determination around how, like, whether it's accurate, whether it's a trap. It appears to be basically accurate, so they decide to go ahead with the plan. And Bond says to tell Tatiana that they will make their move on the 14th. Then on the 13th, they arrive at the embassy and blow the place up, creating a whole bunch of chaos, where Bond is able to walk in, grab the Lecter. He finds Tatiana in the fray, and they escape. At some point, my memory is a little bit fuzzy, but at some point in the process of this, Tatiana tells Bond that she needs to dispose of the Bulgarian agent, or that he needs to dispose of the Bulgarian agent because she's been spotted by the Bulgarian agent, and so her cover is blown, and Bond is like, no, don't worry about it, that's taken care of. Not sure why or how, but it's done.
I love that it still doesn't totally trust her, and he's like, yep, we're going to do this on the 14th, and then does it a day early, and she's very discombobulated about it as well, but it all sort of works. And because she also doesn't know about this guy. That's the thing, right? Like, she also doesn't know about Red Grant chasing her and like tailing them as well. The scene, by the way, where they're running through the streets and they head to the train station, the filming attracted such a massive crowd that they couldn't get the shots that they needed. And so the director asked the stunt coordinator to create a diversion. And so the stunt man went across the street and pretended to be dangerously dangling off of a balcony so that everyone was like, oh my goodness, what's happening over here, so that the production could carry on with filming.
That's amazing.
Without distraction. Also, apparently the scene where the embassy is like burning down, they were like, what said to the special effects, they're like, okay, put like smoke pots around there and do this, and then we'll start filming. And apparently like hadn't cleared that. And so they start doing this and making it look like the building's burning down, and they're filming it and everything. And all the people locally are like, holy crap, this building's burning down. And so in the movie, you see like the emergency services showing up, like an ambulance and fire crews and everything. That's real. That's just that's the fire department showing up because they think this building's actually on fire. And it's like, well, I mean, you got the shot, I guess.
That's one way to do it.
Yeah. That's 1960s filmmaking.
Yeah, no doubt.
That's why you can make these movies for comparatively little money.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so Tatiana and Bond and Karim are all making their escape from the embassy. They get to the train station. They hop aboard the Orient Express. They get spotted by a Soviet security officer who is just like hanging out at the train station. He tails them on board the train. Also, Red Grant follows them onto the train. They notice that they get spotted by the Soviet security officer. So while they're on the train, Karim and Bond basically corner him, push him into a compartment, stuff his mouth with a handkerchief, and use his blazer to like immobilize his arms and sit him down so that he can't make any trouble. And Karim is like, all right, don't worry, I'll keep watch. Sits down next to him, and in what is like one of my favorite lines in the whole movie, sits down next to him and is like, I have led a particularly fascinating life. Perhaps you'd like to hear about it? And the guy goes, huh? And he's like, oh, you would? Okay. And he just like pulls out a cigar and and then the door closes. And like, just a great You know what's going on behind those doors. It's hilarious. It's just like another one of those like really charming moments for Karam. One of the like bits that makes him such an endearing character in this film. So anyhow, Bond goes back to hang out with Tatiana, but he gets word from the conductor. Karam had chatted with the conductor about getting the train to stop at an upcoming stop where we would meet up with one of Karam's sons who would help them escape from Turkey with the Lecter machine. That's the plan. But the conductor stops by the compartment and lets him know that there's been a terrible accident. And so Bond locks Tatiana in the room, heads back to the compartment where he left Karam behind, and both Karam and the Soviet security agent are now dead, apparently having killed one another. It looks like what happened is the guy got loose and stabbed Karam, and Karam managed to kill him before dying himself. They have both died. So Bond basically tells the conductor that something's up, and they miss their rendezvous with Karam's son. The train doesn't stop.
The son realizes that something is up, and when the train makes its next natural stop, one of them is waiting at the train platform. He and Bond exchange the code phrases, which is overheard by Red Grant, who's in the train, who's tailing them, and they make arrangements for how they're going to meet up at a different stop in the future, and then
that's right,
make sure that they can figure out some way to actually escape, because the problem is getting across the border without being searched and having the Lecter discovered and confiscated.
That's right. So he asks Karam's son to contact MI6 in London and tell them to dispatch someone from Station Y to meet him at like an upcoming stop.
I assume Station Y would be Yugoslavia?
Probably.
If Station T is Turkey?
Yeah. I mean, the train is traveling through Yugoslavia on the map as they give us the, like, hey, we zoomed out to the map, overlaid with the train wheels, and the route of the train is up through Yugoslavia. So, presumably. But anyhow, they get to their next stop. Red Grant is first off the train, and he spots a guy who we assume either he knows what the agent looks like, or he spots a guy who just like he's able to identify based on the briefcase that he's got and his sort of like, you know, the way he carries himself, that he is the British agent. And so he runs out, he exchanges the code phrase with the agent and is like, come with me. And they go into the men's room basically. And moments later, Red Grant emerges alone with the briefcase and the man's hat, then proceeds to exchange the code phrase with Bond, basically ingratiating himself to Bond as like, oh yes, I'm your contact from Station Y.
What I love about that is that we as the audience, and I'm actually amazed that they did this, we don't hear the dialogue.
Yeah.
The camera is so far back that we just see Grant go up and sort of gesture with his cigarettes, and the other guy gestures with his lighter, and then they both sort of nod and put their cigarettes and lighter away. And we just have to remember that what this code phrase that we've heard a couple times is, and realize what Red Grant is doing. And then when he comes out and talks to Bond, we don't even hear them do the code phrase again. And it's played really, really well. It's a really cool scene.
Yes, it is. It's well staged and it's exciting. Like sometimes these scenes, or like scenes like this, particularly in these movies, are like, you know, they're a little quaint or a little silly or whatever. And like this one is not. It's played completely like straightforwardly, and it's like just a thrilling scene watching all of these pieces sort of fall into place. It's really well done. I like it a lot.
Now, was that man from Station Y meant to be a 00? Because M had mentioned earlier that was it all the 00s or all the agents would be issued with this briefcase? I don't think they were meant to be 00, because surely they would know who James Bond was and wouldn't have been fooled by.
Yeah, I think it was just an agent.
Mm-hmm.
In any case, he boards the train. He passes himself off as an MI6 agent. He joins them and basically plays himself off as being the, you know, bring me up to speed on what's going on, old man. They go to have dinner, and at dinner, Grant drugs Tatiana. And he tries to do it very stealthily, but Bond notices, sort of starts to put together the fact that this guy isn't who he says he is. They get into a fight in the train car. Great fight scene in like really cramped closed quarters between Bond and Grant. And Grant wins. Grant overpowers Bond and has him like at the point of his gun, basically. And Grant, in the course of this conversation, reveals that Tatiana had no idea that any of this was going on. She thought she was working for Russia and had no involvement with Spectre, and that as soon as Bond is dead, he's going to dispose of her too. He reveals that he's going to stage their death as a murder-suicide, and that he will leak to the press the video of them sleeping together that was secretly recorded in Turkey as a way to like justify why this, in order to maintain his reputation, he killed her and himself, and like it's sort of irrelevant, but that's his plan. That's why the tape exists. And Bond proceeds to like start basically bargaining for his life. You know, he's like, how much are they paying you? We'll double it. He's like, oh no, I will take pleasure in killing you. And he's like, well, you've clearly got the upper hand on me, but here, I can give you 50 gold sovereigns in my briefcase if you'll let me live. And Grant is like, show me. And so Bond opens the briefcase and shows him the 50 gold sovereigns. And he's like, I bet there are 50 gold sovereigns in his briefcase too. He goes and he grabs the other briefcase and pulls it down. And Grant is like, no. I think you're up to something. Let me open this one.
It's so well played because Bond is like, yeah, there's 50 gold sovereigns here in this briefcase. You should open it. And he's like, no, you open it. And so Bond does.
You're too eager for me to open this.
Yeah. And so Bond does, and nothing happens. And then is like, yeah, is there ones in the other one? And Bond does this great, like, make it look like I don't have a good poker face moment where he's like, yes, let me just check. Like, he's excited to check the other briefcase. And that's when he's like, wait, I'll open the other briefcase. Thank you. And it's just this terrific, like, I don't know, like triple blind, basically, that where he goofs, because when they went to dinner, he sent Grant and Tatiana down ahead and primed because he checked this guy's briefcase to make sure it was actually an MI6 briefcase, and primed the gas, and then joined them at dinner. And so he knows that both cases are primed to go off.
Yeah, it's a great scene. Like the super eager like leap to open this. He literally almost leaps to open the second briefcase, and he's like, no. Hold on, I'll do this one. Yeah, it's a great play off one another. So of course the gas goes off, filling the car and giving Bond a chance to turn the tables. So he and Grant get into like a hand-to-hand fight. The gun gets knocked aside. Grant manages to like pull out the garrote from his watch and start to use it, but Bond manages to overpower him and turn the tables and strangles him with his own watch garrote.
The sequence is so good. It was blocked out obviously by the stuntmen, but most of it was performed by the actual actors. They ran 3 cameras on it, and just like these guys just beat the hell out of each other in the train car. It's such a good, this fight scene is really excellent. Definitely top 2 James Bond fights a guy in a train car scenes.
Of which there are more than 2.
Yeah, I know, right?
It happens surprisingly frequently.
The other one I always think of is the one versus Whisper in Live and Let Die.
Yeah, which is also like super iconic.
Really good.
So anyhow, he kills Grant. Then the train comes to a stop, and Tatiana's still like unconscious at this point, having been drugged. But he manages to sort of like get her lucid enough that she's able to get up and get off the train. He's like, "Listen, this is Grant's escape plan. We have to make a move. We have to get out of here now. You need to either wake up or I'm leaving you behind." So he gets her to her feet. And he grabs the Lecter and they bolt off the train. And there's like a flower truck parked by the side of the tracks. Bond manages to sort of sneak around and incapacitate the driver of the truck who was waiting for Grant, and puts him in the truck. Puts Tatiana in the flower bed in the back of the truck. Is like, just stay back there and sleep it off. Hops in the driver's seat and starts driving, when a helicopter catches up to them and starts trying to chase them down and make them stop, and like begins dropping grenades on them from the air, shooting them with a machine gun and making these close passes. It's a fun little like helicopter chasing a truck scene.
Eventually Bond gets on foot and it turns into sort of a homage / inspiration to North by Northwest.
Yeah.
Bond, who is often in these shots, not entirely. There's a lot of stuntman Bob Simmons in here, but there's often actual Sean Connery getting really close to a helicopter.
Yeah. There's one scene that I assumed had to have been forced perspective, because the helicopter looks like it's 5 feet off the ground, and Bond like dives for cover, and I'm like, is it just the helicopter is actually like 50 feet away from him, and they've just shot it in a way to make it look like they're close? But given how many other things were filmed by the seat of their pants in this film, I half expect that they actually know they just buzzed him at 5 feet off the ground. I wouldn't put it past them.
There is at least one shot where it's noted that the helicopter pilot flew way too close to Sean Connery.
That's probably the one then.
Mm-hmm.
So he takes cover in a pile of rocks, digs out his little folding sniper rifle, and waits for the helicopter to come back. The helicopter comes back, and the guy who's sitting in the passenger seat of the helicopter primes a grenade to drop. Bond shoots him in the arm. He drops the grenade into the cockpit of the helicopter, and the helicopter explodes and falls out of the sky.
Whoops.
Oops. Yeah. So now that that's dealt with and the helicopter is off their case, he basically hops back in the truck and continues driving to the next stage of Grant's escape plan, which is a boat that is docked, presumably on the Mediterranean.
Yes. The helicopter chase and the boat scene were meant to be filmed in Istanbul. And this production was actually plagued with problems. Terrence Young, the director, was in a helicopter crash flying to scene. I mean, obviously so was the pilot and someone else. Everybody was okay, but the helicopter sunk on trying to get on their way to this scene. A boat full of camera equipment sunk in the Bosphorus, and they couldn't actually get a helicopter to film the helicopter scene with, and some of the special effects crew were almost arrested trying to get one from an airbase. And so they're like, all right, we're going to shoot all those scenes back in Scotland. And so the helicopter scene we just saw and the boat scene we're about to see are all filmed in Scotland, but it's meant to be the Mediterranean. Yes.
Right. The thing I think I appreciate most about this scene is Bond just manifesting a captain's hat onto his head. I assumed the truck driver was wearing it, but I wasn't paying that close attention to the truck driver's costume. So
maybe it was on the boat.
He steps out of the truck wearing a captain's hat, which is great. Like, it's a nice little addition to the costume, and it makes for an incredibly iconic cover photo for the movie. But it just appears out of nowhere as far as I'm concerned. So anyhow, he rushes Tatiana into the boat. The boat has, of course, got 4 barrels of fuel on its back because, I don't know, I guess if you're hopping aboard a boat, like a power boat in Istanbul, and taking that, or Yugoslavia at this point, I guess, and then driving that boat back to Russia, you probably need a lot of gas. But the barrels of fuel will come up in a few minutes. So ushers everybody onto the boat, leaves, they cast off. He throws the driver of the truck overboard, like halfway out to sea, to leave him behind. As they're headed back to I don't know, safe territory. They're headed back to Venice is where they're aiming for at this point. They get cut off by 3 Spectre boats. One more final action scene ensues where the 2 boats are they're still trying to get the Lecter. So they're not actually trying to kill Bond at this point. They're just trying to get the boat to stop. The Spectre training guy who we saw way back at the beginning of the movie is leading these boats, and he's got Spectre Green and Spectre Red and Spectre Black. He is aboard Spectre Black, and so he's ordering them to like shoot on the boat, but not too close to the boat because he doesn't want them dead or sunk. And they have rifle grenades, and they're like using rifle grenades to try and force them to stop. And they manage to trap them in this like little bay. Bond basically unloads all the fuel, but like the fuel barrels get shot up, and so they're leaking fuel. So he manages to unload those into the ocean and essentially sets up a trap, because he sets up this line of fuel barrels and traps himself in this bay. And the 3 boats like come up and then like cut their engines to hold them in the bay.
Is that why they cut their engines? I never quite I was like, are they trying not to ignite the gas? I never quite understood why they cut their engines there. That makes way more sense.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's just he's like trapped in a little bay area, and so they're like, if we just stop here, he can't escape. And then he lights up he uses the flare gun to light up the fuel that's on the water, and that burns the 3 boats and kills everybody aboard. They are able to sail off to Venice.
There is one other thing, though, because you'd be forgiven for thinking that this scene didn't happen where it does, but it does. Bond and Tatiana get on the boat, they kick the truck driver off the boat, and then they're like, great, we escape. And then it cuts, the scene that cuts to Blofeld. We go back to Blofeld talking to Kleb and Constantine, and it's very jarring.
That's right.
And he's like, well, that didn't work. And Constantine's like, well, the plan was perfectly executed, but unfortunately the people that Kleb chose were not able to make my plan go ahead. And Kleb's like, they did exactly what you said. They did everything that you said that should happen. And Blofeld is like, well, you know, we do not tolerate failure here, and you know the price for failure. What's the guy's name? Morzeny, the big dude, played by Walter Gotell, comes in behind Kleb. He has like it's a poison-tipped knife comes out the end of his boot. And Blofeld's like, you know the penalty for failure, etc. And then he winds up and kicks Constantine. It's set up to make it look like Kleb's going to take the fall for this, but he kicks Constantine, who then expires from this poison-tipped dart thing, because apparently Blofeld determined that it was in fact the plan that was bad, and not Kleb's thing. But he's like, so you have to make sure that they don't get away. What's weird is then we cut back to the boat thing, and Morzeny is on one of those boats.
Right.
So the timeline here is maybe a little confusing. Again, a lot of stuff came together in the edit in this movie. So it all works, but there's definitely some stuff that I probably would have done differently if they'd, finished the script before they started rolling.
But it makes sense, because then we have like Morzeny and Kleb both enact their plans to prevent things from going sideways after they have both just been told you need to stop things from going sideways.
So all the boats go up, and Bond and Tatiana are now in Venice at a hotel.
Yes, and they are actually checking out of their hotel in Venice in order to fly back to England. A housekeeping maid arrives in the room, and it is, of course, none other than Rosa Kleb. She, just puttering around the room as Bond is like doing up his tie, and he's like on the phone and walks into another room. And while he's in the other room, she walks over to the lecture machine and like grabs it to start making a move for the door. And then he walks back into the room, and she like drops it and just sort of starts looking like she was dusting it when Bond is not looking. She reveals, in fact, that she has a poison-tipped shoe knife and begins to, like, attack. She actually holds a gun on Bond initially, doesn't she?
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. She pulls out a gun.
And orders Tatiana to take the lector and leave.
That's right. Orders Tatiana to take the lector and leave. Tatiana, of course, recognizes her as the Colonel of Smersh, and is in a position now where she has to decide between Bond and her duty. Because as far as we know, like, she still doesn't know that Kleb is a Spectre agent, so she's sort of conflicted in the moment. But she ends up knocking the gun out of Kleb's hand, saving Bond, which is what causes Kleb to like kick out her little shoe knife. And there's this frankly amazing scene where this relatively little old Russian lady is like awkwardly kicking with a shoe knife, and Bond just like picks up a chair and uses it to keep her at length, like at distance, and then pins her to the wall with the chair. Tatiana picks up the gun that she knocked out of the hand and has to like think for a moment about which one of them she's going to shoot, and then she shoots Kleb, and Bond quips about it. Then, their mission accomplished. They hop aboard a gondola to the airport. They start to smooch, and Bond pulls out the film that he had from Grant and has a look at it, then pitches it into the canal, and we cut to the credits at the end of the film,
where it says that James Bond will return in the next Ian Fleming thriller, Goldfinger.
It does indeed.
So that they've got the next James Bond will return thing in there. By the way, that shoe knife, that's a real thing.
Really?
That the KGB used. And then, during the end credits, we get the theme song sung by Matt Monro from Russia with Love.
Yeah, it's a good song.
Over second unit photography of Venice. The whole end scene, it's very clearly rear projection and B-roll of them in the gondola ride. It's very strange. Yeah.
So, what do you think of this film?
It's great. It's really good. Like they know they got their formula down, and it's wild reading and hearing about the challenges in production to get it to this point, and how it was like over budget and over schedule, and they were rewriting stuff on the day, and there's a whole scene that got cut because at like a screening, Terrence Young's son was like, hey, but that character got killed 3 scenes ago, and they were like, oh my god. And they had to cut a scene. It's amazing that it got to this point, and everything looks like it was absolutely intentional, even when you know that stuff definitely wasn't. But no, it's really, really good.
Yeah, I agree. I think this movie rules. This has long probably been my favorite of the Connery Bond movies. I like this movie just like slaps from beginning to end. Every aspect of it is good. I really like Tatiana as a character in this movie because she it's still 1960s Bond kind of sexism, but she has a little bit of agency in the plot, and she's not really she's put in the position of having to do this by Kleb, but she's not really like taken advantage of by the story at all, or like by Bond. Like she actually works as a bit of a foil for Bond through parts of the film. Karen Bay is awesome, as we have discussed at length. Like he's really good, and the level of complexity in the plot of this film versus the previous one, and I mean honestly the next one, like there's just a ton going on in this movie, and all of it works really well, which as you've told the story of the production of this movie, sometimes despite itself, it all manages to work really well. It's just like, this is exciting. And this is one of those movies that's like basically all the good parts of Bond with none of the bad, or relatively little of the bad. It's just like, it's fun and exciting and romantic and international espionage escapades with larger than life characters. I love this movie. It's so good.
I completely agree. Yeah. What was your most James Bond moment?
Most James Bond moment in this one is you know what? It's probably honestly, well, at least she got her kicks right at the end. Like that whole fight scene and the quip when Kleb is killed after, like, this fight scene is so tacky, but it's so James Bond. It with the toe knife and the different allegiances in the room, and he still manages to play this completely ridiculous fight scene off with an unflappable wit. It's so James Bond.
There's just so much in it. I'm a big fan of him sort of navigating the scene with Grant with the cases. I think that's really, really good. And then from that's a very James Bond movie thing, the whole bit with the barrels being like, no, this is great, we'll cut the barrels loose, we'll blow them up with a flare gun, and everything, just explosions will happen. Like that's not a normal spy movie. That's a James Bond thing.
Fair enough. Yeah I would definitely rate the barrels as like best stunt. The train car fight scene is also pretty darn close because of like just how good it is. But that like blowing up the barrels and the giant line of fireball that comes with it is like, that is the scene. Like that is the image that sticks in your mind when this movie is like, when somebody says From Russia with Love, it's like, oh yeah, it's Bond with the flare gun. That sticks with me as like my favorite stunt.
Yeah, I think I totally agree there. So sort of power rankings, by virtue of the fact that this has a pre-title cold open scene, this is now the best one. And it might hold for a while. Like James Bond getting killed before the opening titles, that's strong. And these were excellent opening titles, and it had a song. So
yes,
it is currently the best song for the movie.
Yep.
It's also worth noting that by this time, Ian Fleming, who initially was not completely sold on Sean Connery as Bond originally, had come around to him so much that he then later wrote into the novels that James Bond had Scottish ancestry.
Oh, interesting.
Because originally he was British, and Sean Connery, of course, is Scottish, and Fleming was like, I don't know about this, but after Dr. No, and then particularly after this movie, was like, okay, no, this guy's great, and then wrote that in, and the Scottish ancestry comes up in On Her Majesty's Secret Service.
And other subsequent movies way, way, way,
Yes.
way, way down the line. Yeah.
That's true. Yes, it is sort of a big part of Skyfall. That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So, stack ranking this film versus Dr. No. What's your say?
It's closer than I would have thought, but it is this one. From Russia with Love is the better movie, even though Dr. No, as I said last episode, surprised me with honestly how good it is and how well it holds up. Because I don't know why I had it in my head that Dr. No was like, but no, Dr. No is actually great. But this one's better.
Yeah, I agree on both counts.
So yeah, that'll do it. As the end credits say, we will return with Goldfinger, which is another classically groundwork laying Bond film for the that's the first one where there's a real like big quotable villain monologue and pushing even more into the like bizarre traits for the henchman kind of thing. Yep. And it's also a classic, so I'm looking forward to rewatching it and talking about it. But that'll be next time. For now, thank you all so much for listening. I have been Graham, and that has been Matt.
Mm-hmm.
And this show and everything we do is brought to you by you and your kind support of our Patreon at patreon.com/loadingreadyrun. Thank you so much for being here and for listening.
Yeah, thank you very much.
And this podcast will return.